Thank you, committee, for the opportunity to return to work on this issue. So I am the co-executive director of Open Doors, formerly Family Life Center. We provide services and advocacy to people with criminal records. And this was actually the very first issue I worked on back in 2008 when I started at Open Doors. I know that Mike and I have been around a long time now, so I'm not sure everyone remembers back what was going on. I know Representative Magella was involved in that conversation. But I just want to talk a little bit about what got us interested in this issue, the work that was done in the legislation that was passed, and then why we're still caring about it. So a lot of the people we work with came to us and told us that this was a problem. You know, the state basically operates a collection agency for people that have been convicted of crimes, and that the agency was functioning dysfunctional. Essentially, we're locking people up too much, spending a lot of resources to do it, and the outcomes were really just hurting our citizens instead of bringing money into the system in an effective way. So I spent about a year researching it. I went to courts, I went to the intake center and interviewed about 25 people. I analyzed all of the Department of Corrections data, as much judiciary data as I could get. I came up with a report with some conclusions, and basically found that the system was not working well. That we were spending a lot of money to incarcerate people over and over and over again, when it was already clear that we weren't getting any money from them. You can't get blood from a stone. You would lock up someone over and over if they owed maybe $500, and each time you lock them up, you would let them out and not get any money. You'd add an extra $125 for the warrant fee and release them after sometimes 3, 7. I talked to someone who had been incarcerated for a month. And so not only was the system not working as a collection agency should work, but it was also really verging on unconstitutionality, because it's unconstitutional to incarcerate someone just for being indigent. And that's essentially what we were doing. We weren't incarcerating them for not paying. We were incarcerating them for failure to appear, which essentially was the same thing. So we found that 70% of all commitments in the state were for this reason. It was about 2,500 people a year. That 11% spent over a week in prison, and just for this debt. And mind you, we're talking this whole time, just to sort of make one clear correction from some of the recent conversations. We're talking about court fines and fees, not restitution. All the work that we've done, all the legislation has been trying to piece restitution out of it, because we know that that's a separate conversation. That's money that's owed to a victim. So we're just talking about money that's owed to the state, sort of a user fee. And I did an analysis where I tried to look at how much money is it costing us as conservative as possible. Because I know you talk to people in corrections, there's a lot of conversation. It's $40,000 a year, it's $50,000 a year. But those are sort of big picture numbers. How much money do you actually spend just like paying for one person to be in prison for one day? It's a lot less. But even being as conservative as possible, about 15% of the people that we were spending more money to imprison them than they actually owed. Right? So the system was just sort of out of whack. It was going too far. So there was some excellent legislation that was passed in 2008. Representative O'Neill was the sponsor in the House. Chairman Lally was the chairman of the committee. We worked with the Speaker, Murphy, back at the time, and really trying to fix the system to take into account ability to pay when the state was assessing court fines and fees. Because it was clear that, for one, Rhode Island assesses a lot more than other states. When I looked at Massachusetts, New Hampshire, our fines were high, and then when people couldn't pay them, we were very quick to incarcerate. So none of us are saying that we shouldn't have a system that is proactively going after these payments, that we should not charge user fees. That's not what we're arguing. We're trying to make this system make sense. I talked to one guy when I went into intake who was homeless, had chronic nerve disease, diabetes, hepatitis, was unemployed, no income. He owed $717, and he was being held on bail for $717, and he ended up serving 7 days. And he had appeared multiple times in court doing his duty, and then one time he did show up and they put out a warrant. Going back to the legislation, it was sponsored by Senator Metz in the Senate, and it passed in its second year. And it was also, this bill was also paired with another bill, which created a $150 reduction for every day someone spent in prison. So it was in some ways kind of intuitive, but what we were saying was that if you spent a night in prison for court fines, we would take $150 off of what you owed. And that was essentially to try to make the judiciary pay attention to how long we were incarcerating these people. That had an immediate effect in reducing the amount of time that people were spending in prison for these charges. But then, back in 2010, there was legislation that reduced that to $50. So we have tried to do our best to determine whether or not this legislation that you all passed back in 2008 was implemented and effective. I did research a year after, trying to figure that out. And then I worked with Rachel, who is going to speak next, I believe, or soon, who did a very extensive, over 100-page thesis at Brown University to look at this issue very in depth. So we've tried to use our resources to go back and figure out, is the state doing what is going to be effective? Is the state doing what you've asked it to do? And our conclusion continues to be that we're not doing as well as we could. That we're not doing it in a way that follows the legislation, and we're not doing it in a way that both maximizes sort of the amount of money versus the cost effectiveness of the system and the rights of the indigent defendants. So I think the goal of this legislation is to continue to open up this conversation between our organizations, between the individuals that are affected by this, between the legislature, between the judiciary, to see if we can do a better job.
Thank you. Any questions by any members? Well, thank you, Nick. And next is Rachel Black.